So please feel free to settle in, everyone. And basically, the way things will proceed is that Mark and I will start off bringing us into the soul space, trading off, reading a few poems and pieces back and forth. And then we'll go into conversation. And Mark's going to be sharing with us about his wonderful new book, The Half-Life of Angels, a larger collection of his poetry from the last few decades, I think it is, Mark, isn't it?
Yes.
That's right. So welcome to you all, and welcome to Mark Nepo. Many of you may know Mark if you've been to any of our Poetry of Resilience webinars. Mark is the author of numerous books, including the Book of Awakening, the Book of Soul. I've just been reading through The Exquisite Risk again, revisiting that book, and books of poetry as well. And so we're so grateful actually that he's done the work of collecting his poetry in this larger volume now, so that we can kind of have it all in one place. And it's available in hardcover, paperback, wherever you get your books for sure. And we'll also share a link in the aftercare packet. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, James. It's wonderful to be here. And thank you all for taking the time to gather like this. It's a joy. And I am thrilled to have this new book out. As you've mentioned, it gathers 3 books of poetry within one volume, and it really gathers work that I've explored in my 50s and 60s, which means by definition that I'm in my 70s now, which if I'd met someone my age when I was younger, I would have thought they were ancient. It doesn't seem so old now.
And it's not. I say as I get closer and closer. So Mark, we would love it if you would start us out with just reading a couple poems from the new book, whatever you're
Oh,
moved
thank
to
you.
share.
Yes, let me start with one that is from about, I know some of you are dog people, and I am, which is interesting because, when I was growing up, I was bitten when I was little, so I had a phobia of dogs until I went through my cancer journey. And on the other side, amazingly, I wasn't afraid anymore.
Wow.
And so my loved ones got me my first dog. But this is about our current dog, Zuzu, a yellow lab. This is called the Mute Sage. When the jar fell off the counter and broke, our dog went to lick up the honey, but we were afraid she'd cut herself on the broken glass. You kept her back while I swept up the slivers. Later that night, it occurred to me that this is what it is to be human, always going for the honey while tiptoeing around the glass. The next week it was so cold that ice stuck to our dog's pads. We had to stop every block or so to free her feet from clumps of ice. This too was a lesson, for without warmth we can't make our way. As I write this, she dreams whatever dogs dream, and I keep looking for whatever humans look for. They're such furry little angels,
Mm.
these furry little angels. And this is a poem, um, some of you know from my work, my long, kind of complicated journey with my parents who are now gone. And, in a strange way, I understand them better now that they're gone because they're quieter. They made a lot of noise while they were here. And so I can understand them better. This is a poem called As He Lay There, and this is about my father toward the end of his life. When my father was close to death, we were stripped of our history. I sat by his bed holding the ancient twig-like hand of a 93-year-old who, though absent for years, was mythic to me. As he lay there under the weight of a stroke, life undressed the myth I put on him, and he was just a frail old man who had introduced me to the sea, who had loved wood into marvelous shapes, who surrounded himself with books, though he was a slow reader. After a lifetime of holding back, he wanted to speak, though he couldn't, and I understood him completely.
Mm. Wow. That is so beautiful, Mark. I love what you say about understanding your parents more when they're quieter. I've lost both of my parents now, and I feel the relationships coalescing into something new. You know, that idea that they make so much noise when they're alive, and whether it's clamoring for our attention or wanting to give advice or having different ideas. I feel like that's so true. And I went through something similar with my mother when she was toward the end of her life. And
Hmm.
so I'll read that poem here.
Oh, please
Um,
do.
yeah, let's see here. So this one is called Touch. We are changed by the smallest gestures of touch, as when, in my mother's final days, I smoothed the loose gray hairs back from her face as she shivered all over, smiling with pleasure. Like a bolt of lightning shooting through me, she said, the threads of her mind beginning to unravel, although I think we both knew she was talking about love.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you, James.
Yeah. And someone pointed out to me that that idea that she was using the simile, speaking to her poet son, that this was a way of connecting on that deeper level too. And it's also like I found that when the threads of her mind were beginning to unravel, we were brought back to our essence as well, just as you
Yeah,
described.
I think, this is interesting because I think that, and we've talked about this before, for me, these moments, whether they're with loved ones or they're alone in nature or suddenly captivated by the light on a broken piece of glass in an alley in New York City, whatever it might be, these moments are the poetry, and the words are just the trail. I so think of poetry as the unexpected utterance of the soul. So this leads me. We're kind of doing this in a jazz way, which is wonderful. I have a poem in the new book called "Unraveled."
Mm.
Let me share that.
And if you would give
Unraveled.
us the page number too, Mark, I think we have some folks who are following along with
Oh,
their
sure, sure.
copies.
So the Mute Sage was on page 183, and As He Lay There was on page 297. All in the half life. I'm reading all from that today. And Unraveled is on page 103. Unraveled. It's as if God squeezes this beautiful, terrible day like a lemon, and those caught in the grip grow so tender that there is nowhere left to go. Others not caught in the squeeze don't understand. There are things to do and bills to pay. But all the plans against disaster have been squeezed out of you, and the bee nuzzling its face in the nectar of the peony seems now like the end of all your questions.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Tenderness is one of my new favorite words for sure. Um, oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I was reflecting on this idea that the moments themselves are poetry, as you say, and the words are just the trail, the breadcrumbs that lead us back to those moments and that allow others into them. Because I was noticing in the Half-Life of Angels, your new book, that over and over you talk about how there's almost this craving or this drive for something larger and transcendent, and then it comes in a corner of the sky, or when you're sitting with your parents around a fire, listening to the peepers and suddenly seeing something beneath them that you hadn't noticed before. And I so resonate with that idea of, just life and poetry being contained in those moments. So
Well, it's interesting. Thank you. It's
yeah.
interesting that, in our modern world, especially in the West, we have been miseducated to look or try to be both special,
Mm,
exceptional, extraordinary. And I think, all many years ago when I almost died of cancer in my 30s, I think the real reward for still being here was that I was scoured to have the lens of the miraculous, that everything is miraculous. Everything, the ordinary is extraordinary if we open our heart to it.
mm,
And that's the poetry.
mm. Yeah, I almost thought you were going to say if we open our eyes to it, but it's the heart, right? The eyes of the heart. Um, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll share one that I just wrote very recently. And, this is, we find our sages where we find them. And so one of my sages and teachers, of course, is my husband, who works as a farmer, is, very in tune with pausing and taking in the beauty of the world, and is often reminding me that I need to do the same. So this one is called Bluebells. Before we go inside for the night, he insists I visit the plastic pots which hold the Virginia bluebells he will soon plant in the yard. And so I do, kneeling in gravel, examining the buds which begin as purple nubs, then open into blue blossoms so bell-like, I expect them to ring as I reach out and touch each one. With dusk coming on and dinner yet to be made, the man I love asking, aren't they beautiful? And me nodding to the flowers, and maples bursting lime green leaves above us, and ferns uncurling after a long winter sleep, each cluster of fronds like dancers holding still in mid pose. My yes now including everything alive and waking up on this spring day like no other.
Oh, thank you, James. I love that line, my yes now including everything alive.
Mm.
That's very, very Whitman-esque. And yes, and I mean, I think Whitman, of course, there's so many echoes of the tribe we're all a part of, all of us who are here listening. I think one of the things that comes here as we're opening all this up is that, I think that writing from the truth of our lives is necessary. And then that opens us up to be clear conduits for the truth of life other than us. And I
Mm.
think that I've found in my life that kind of there's a rhythm there when I process and face the truth of my own life, then I'm open enough to feel the life of others,
Mm.
human or not. And then when I go there, then I learn something that turns me back to learn more about my own life, and it
Mm.
keeps going. So this is a poem that's not about my life, but it's about an old samurai warrior who gave up his sword. And this is on page 180. It's called Swordless. They say the old samurai, tired of being on guard, gave his sword away. It took months to accept a life without armor, months to let his wounds turn into blossoms. In time, he took to long walks along the river, where he would sit alone and play the one-string koto. Sought out by a young soldier, the former hero listened into dusk and simply said, I have looked my whole life for the one string. When the would-be warrior asked about greatness, the swordless samurai replied, understanding life is like tossing a scarf in the air and watching it drape its way to the ground.
Oh, I love it. So good at endings, Mark. Oh my gosh.
Well, and let me say thank you, but let me say that, and this is where the creative process I've discovered is the introspective process, that I don't know where these poems are going. I discover those endings, and those endings become my teachers.
Mm.
So I didn't say, "Oh, wouldn't that be neat to end with that image?" I'm not that smart, you know. No, it's that, and how it is the introspective process is that when I follow a story, an image, a feeling, a confusion, a wonder, or like the bluebells, or like my dog trying to lick up the honey from the broken jar, whatever it might, when I follow that authentically, then I am often rewarded with an insight or a story or a lesson, and those become, and I know from the ring that I know they're true. I know they're
Mm.
right before I understand what they mean,
Mm.
and then I have to be with them. So yeah, I love that image. Understanding life is like tossing a scarf in the air and watching it drape its way to the ground. So I knew that was right. But then I said, well, what does that mean? I'm not even sure I still know. I don't know yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're still watching the scarf draped to the ground,
Yeah,
it's in
right.
the midst of happening. And there's no sort of end to that. That's partly why that image captures us. But it's so good, I think, for all of us to hear that you start off in a place of willingness to be surprised and to follow where an image or a phrase might take you, because I think it's so easy to think that we need to know where we're going before we even begin, whether we're talking about the writing process or life, right? And living or writing into that sense of unknowing, the don't know mind, is, I think, the best way of doing it, because then you don't have to be burdened by the idea that you need to understand everything, or that you can even control it or be certain about the outcome. So I just find it very useful for all of us.
Oh, well, thank you. And there's a wonderful story about Denise Levertov. Some of you might know Denise Levertov was an amazing poet, born in England, spent most of her life in America. She died, I think, in the last 10 years, maybe. But she has a poem called The Secret. And the poem is a little story poem that she was giving a reading at a college. And before the reading started, two undergraduate women came up to her, all excited, and said, "Thank you, thank you. We discovered the secret of life in a line in one of your poems. We can't stay for the reading, but thank you so much." And they leave. And the poem unfolds. She says, "Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You didn't tell me the secret. You didn't even tell me the poem or what line. Wait." And then she thanks them for believing that there is such a secret and for discovering it and forgetting it over and over again. And I love that poem because we retrieve things through our authenticity, but we need each other to understand and to discover meaning. And just because a poem comes through me or you or whoever is here with us doesn't mean we hold the key to the meaning until we're in conversation with each other.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Mark, but sometimes I don't really fully understand a poem's power or its meaning until other people have reflected back to me what it means to them.
Oh,
It's
sure.
that conversation back and forth. And, there is the deeper listening of the poem that allows it to come into being. But then it seems the job is to listen deeply to how it's received or who it touches in the world.
Yeah, very much so. And always, I think, inviting ourselves to see if something touches us, where does it live in us?
Mm.
How do we personalize that? What is the equivalent of putting the sword down for you and me and whoever's listening?
Mm.
What does it mean in your life to play the one string only?
Mm.
So here's a poem going back to my life. Here's a poem on the next page, 181, called Never Lost, Always Found, about my dear grandmother, who was a Russian immigrant. She's gone now, God, 30 years, but she was more of a mother to me than my mother. So this is called Never Lost, Always Found. On the darkest night of the year, Susan's my wife. On the darkest night of the year, Susan asks about Grandma Minnie yet again. And again I soften and speak of being a child in your Brooklyn kitchen, sitting next to your stove as you made latkes, patting the excess oil and giving them to me while they were warm. And Susan jumps up, as she does every year, as if for the first time, and starts grating potatoes. I put on klezmer music, and we make latkes and eat standing in the kitchen. Our dog jumps to the music or to the presence of something unseen. I grab her paws, and we dance briefly to the music of the old world.
Mm. Beautiful. That sense of ritual and the carrying over of ritual into the present life. I think that's such a beautiful way of honoring your grandmother, who shows up so often in your work, right? Like she is this kind of muse too.
Absolutely. And so, again, for those of you who are listening, so, I invite you to explore a lyrical poem about something, some little piece of food or giving or receiving or warmth or smell from when you were a child, and someone either in your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation made you feel at home,
Mm,
made you feel briefly that the world is your home.
mm, mm. That's so beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Well, I'll read another one about my mother here. Let's see. And I love that idea, Mark, about um, finding a home through the sense of ritual and what others give us. And, it can be anything. It can be just, a gesture of warmth and drawing you into the circle. It's really, it doesn't take much. And this is another one. I also love your phrase, unexpected utterance of the soul, because this is one that came very unexpectedly. I was just looking at a photo of my mother and I not long after she had died, and this is what came. So this is called Mother and Son. Though you're gone now, my body still remembers being held by you that evening, wearing my blue fleece pajamas with a white owl on the front, and you saying, who, over and over, both of us laughing as you explained, that's the sound owls make when they need to find each other in the dark before sleep. A way of saying, I can't see you, but I know you must be there.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Mm,
We all, when you share that, James, I mean, it points up too for me that, uh, we all think about mythologies, whether they're Greek mythologies or different cultures, but all those myths started as very particular stories
mm,
that I think the particulars wore off or were eroded through time, and they're left with these archetypal stories. But all that to say that each of us has a personal mythology,
mm,
and we take it for granted. And one of the things that's helpful for our spiritual journey that poetry can serve is, can we pay attention to the constellation of those stories, even about these very often, as you said, little moments, that are actually guideposts or foundational stones in our ground, that so that we can return to them so that we can return to them when we lose our way. So the the narrative of our lives is not random. When we look back, there are these very strong turning points by which we know who we are. And so this is one of the great purposes of story.
Mm.
Let me
Absolutely.
share. This is a poem about speaking of lineage, that we're all, whether we know each other or not, we all of our efforts, we've often heard this phrase that, whether it's in sports or whatever it might be, or when someone breaks ground, that they're standing on the shoulders of others.
Mm.
This is a poem in that spirit called Under the Temple. It's on page 178. The temple hanging over the water is anchored on pillars that nameless workers placed in the mud long ago. So never forget that the mud and the hands of those workers are a part of the temple too. What frames the sacred is just as sacred. The dirt that packs the plant is the beginning of beauty. And those who haul the piano on stage are the beginning of music. And those who are stuck, though they dream of soaring, they are the ancestors of our wings.
Mm. Such truth. I think that poem is in the new anthology that I put together that's coming out this
Oh,
fall.
thank you.
I
I
love
remember.
that.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. Yeah. And you say, what frames the sacred is just as sacred. Is that how you put it?
yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so hard to remember that. I think we get caught in believing that the ordinary is not also miraculous and extraordinary, as you were saying earlier. And it connects to, for me anyway, too, to the idea that, these people also have their stories. And, the people who laid the foundation for the temple, the people moving the piano onto the stage, and they are just as essential as anyone else. So I one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you, Mark, was this idea of listening. It strikes me that you are so good at just listening to what is coming through. And I mentioned that I was reading your book, The Exquisite Risk, again. And you start that book talking about these two instances when you were forced to listen and when you were drawn to listen. And I think I've heard you talk about this before, these two kind of opposing ways of moving through the world, though they both get us to listening, which is essential.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I remember exactly which examples I gave, but let me just speak to it now. I mean, I think that listening is with the heart. With the heart is so much the key to how we are connected to everything, to our life of expression, to the trail of poetry, whether we write it down or not, that we live. And so that, of course, in the beginning, like anyone, I was hoping I had something to say. Um, and then eventually I started to realize, oh no, this isn't about me saying anything. This is about me listening.
Mm.
And that actually the poems started to become, somewhere along the way, listening and taking notes. And of course, when I listen with my heart, I have to contribute to what I hear. And that's how my personal life and journey contribute to whatever is coming through. So, there was I can't remember who, it was a critic though, can't remember who, but he made the great distinction, and I think it might have been Abrams, I can't remember, but he made the great distinction between significance and meaning.
Mm.
And significance is the fact that the first woman I fell in love with in high school had auburn hair. That's a significant detail for me. But it has meaning if I keep it at that level. It's meaningful to me, but not to anyone else.
Mm.
But when I can take it through that particularity to the color of anyone's hair who you first fall in love with,
Mm,
then that particular moment resonates and has meaning for everyone. Or the fact in the poem about my father, this sitting next to him by his hospital bed. Now that, some of those things would have significance for me, but until I hold them close enough that I touch in to the universal common point, now they have meaning. So listening opens us up to all life through our individual life. And so being forced to listen is, uh, I remember, I think this might have been the example that when I was in elementary school. I was playing in the, at recess, and I think I was in fourth grade, and in the outside, and I tripped and fell. Like the first time I really fell, like I skinned my knee and my elbow, and I was a little bloody, and I was, crying. And but when I was on the ground, I realized I'd never touched the earth that fully
mm,
yet in my life. And so I was, going to get up, and then I stayed there and hugged the earth.
mm,
And for the first time, I had a felt presence. Oh, this thing that we're standing on that we take for granted actually, oh, this is actually holding us all up.
mm.
And I remember it was just that I was forced to listen. I was forced to listen. And so we're often, through the gravity of experience, uh, we're asked not to rush by what opens us, but to pay attention, because often the teacher is there. And of course, being drawn to listen is following, the word trust literally means follow the heart.
Mm,
So, following our heart, wherever we sense something that makes us, it might be you're on your way somewhere, and you see light on the wing of a goldfinch suddenly, and it makes you pause. But you're late, but it makes you pause. And so is this appointment, does it matter if I'm late? Can I let someone know I'll be late? Because my heart, I'm being drawn to spend some time with the goldfinch who I didn't know I was going to meet in the light. And we can go by that, but often when we do change our plans, when we work with what we're given, not with what we want, the miracle shows up.
mm.
And all of a sudden we go, oh my God, I could have walked right by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems so inherent in that decision. Do you pause or not? You see the light on the goldfinch's wings. Do you choose to pause or do you keep going because you're late and you have a meeting?
So there's a poem about that, but it's not about a goldfinch, but it's on page 365. It's called In the Alley. When young, the light on the broken bit of glass in the alley made it seem a gem. It took years, but now I know the broken bit of glass is a gem. From a distance, so much seems more or less, bigger or smaller, but in time, love and suffering reveal things as they are. When young, I thought that heaven was over the hill, only to find that heaven is what holds us when putting anything broken in the light.
Hmm. I feel like I just want to make Mark Nepo bumper stickers that say, this is what heaven is, right? Oh, placing anything broken into the light. Oh my, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it comes back to those small things, pausing enough to see it. And I think, maybe even taking that extra sacred pause to write it down, whether it becomes something or not really doesn't matter because it becomes something in us. It feels like that's sort of how we both like to move through the world, that we don't care so much if this is a poem or this is going to be an essay or this is going to be in that book. It's about what the moment opens up in you.
Because this, yes, and for me it is because this uh, this relationship, unfolding relationship with the emanating spirit of life as it moves through the things of the world. The life of expression is how we stay in conversation with life. And it's the conversation that keeps us alive, that helps us get up when we fall down, that helps us, clears us when we are lost and confused. And so it's important to stay in conversation with life, whatever means of conversation works for you. For us, it's the life of words and images and expressions and stories. And it could be dance. It could be even more loosely gardening or, whatever we give our full heart to. You could be an auto mechanic, and if you give your full heart to it, you are a poet in that garage.
Mhm. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And someone was talking about pottery, anything that's broken, pottery being mended with gold in the Japanese practice of
Oh, that's
kintsugi.
beautiful. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. A way of bringing it into the light. And actually I'll share another little poem that I often share in readings. And this one is called Kintsugi and based on that Japanese practice, Kintsugi. Anyone who loves someone else already has a broken heart. It's the law. If you want that light to flood your body, you must expose the cracks through which it pours, for they are the source of your beauty and your strength. Think of the Japanese who fill the cracks in a ceramic bowl with pure gold, not only flaunting those so called flaws, but also making each one a priceless vein through which light now moves.
Oh, that's beautiful, James. I love that poem. That's a wonderful poem, and I think it really it really speaks to what we were exploring, um, and it is, it's so many of the traditions speak about this. In the Tibetan mythology, it is said that a spiritual warrior, not a military warrior, but a spiritual warrior who is one who is committed to a life of transformation. A spiritual warrior always has a crack in their heart because that's how the mysteries get in.
Oh, mm,
And other traditions also speak about this. In the Jewish tradition, there's a line in Deuteronomy that says that God places His words like honey on the heart. And there's a little exchange in the Talmud where a precocious student thinks he's caught the rabbi, says, "Well, hey, if God's omniscient, then why doesn't He just put it in our heart, huh?" And the rabbi goes, "Oh, grasshopper, God doesn't put it in your heart because until your heart is broken open, you wouldn't even know that they were there. But once your heart is broken open to the mystery of life, then those words like honey come drip down and soothe the break."
mm. That is beautiful. I love that so much. And we can't actually open if we're too hard, if we solidify our views. I love that idea of breaking open the heart, leaving the cracks so that the mysteries can pour in. Because if you're not open to the mystery, then you think you know it all, or you think you can control things, and that doesn't work for creative practice or for life very well.
Well, and I think that this is also to be clear that we're not talking about deifying suffering. It's like
That's
more
right.
like talking about gravity. No one can escape gravity, and no one spiritually can escape that life will break you open at some point.
Mm,
And there's another paradox I've felt in my life, and that is the paradox that so you don't have to look to be broken open. You just need
Right.
not to resist it when it happens.
Right.
And when it does happen, it's amazing that our tears water what is exposed through the break for the first time.
Mm.
That's never seen the light of life before until you're broken open. And then mysteriously, our tears water what's in the break so it can grow.
Oh,
That's just incredible.
mm.
This is a poem called Cascade. It's on page 344. As soon as we can walk, we are taught to run. In time, we think we have to catch something out of reach, when, if we let go, time carries us the way a river carries a boat with no oars. If we find our place on the bottom, the noise stops, and time holds us in its soft cascade. So jump into the current of time. Oh, sure, we will get wet, but that's the point. Important papers will dry and seem less important, and the secret maps now torn and lost will free us from ourselves. You know, I once saw an old woman leave her belongings on the shore and wade in naked. I feared she might be taking her life, but she was finally just giving herself over to joy.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Oh, that is so beautiful, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that takes me to another poem, and I'll share that. But I also want to say that we're going to leave a little time here at the end for some questions. So if you have any questions for us, please feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. And so this one actually, Mark, I wrote this poem, I think after reading one of your books or poems, I can't remember which, but I think it was probably the Book of Awakening. And you talk about this idea that we have a human part and a being part, and that we
Mm.
are, those two different parts married together, and obviously doing our best to navigate. So this poem is called Human Being. The human part of us wants and needs and breaks, but the being part sees beyond the body's aching joints and joyful noises to the open road ahead. The gravel is covered in a fine layer of snow and ice, with the white sun shining through a tunnel of pines like the unblinking eye of the source. The human part of us knows that if we keep going, we will slip and slide and fall down endlessly. But the being part says, so what? And pushes us onward toward the light, since it knows there is no way but to move forward, step by step, in our heavy boots.
Ah, that's wonderful, and I think there is a great paradox, and I don't know where the poem is, but the teaching of the poem for me, the metaphor is that the human, it's the relationship imagined between a hawk and a horse. And the hawk is our being, our spirit, and the horse is our human part. And so, the hawk, the bird in us, the spirit in us, it sees, hey, we want to go over here, just fly, fly there, that's it, go.
Yeah.
But the horse is going, well, wait a minute. There's a gully over here, and I got to climb over this fence and make sure I don't get cut. And then I get lost around the old barn. So we got to wait. And so that, the being and spirit in us is very direct and clear and says, well, come on, let's go. And the human says, oh, you got to wait for me.
Mm,
And the thing is that, as your poem suggests, this is a marriage of our spirit and humanness that no one can escape,
mm,
because the spirit can't go without us, and we need what the spirit sees. And so we see across the vastness, and then we trudge across the hills.
Yeah. Trudge feels like the right word. It has that feel of being in the mud and the muck and all of that. Would you like to read us one more poem, Mark?
Yeah, this is a poem, just one more, and then we could open up for questions and
Yeah.
love to. This is on page 67 called Three Paths. I had fallen. When I got up, there were three paths I hadn't seen. One went down to the river, where the rhythm of life eased the current. The far path went into the mountains away from the living, where the birds of prey were tired of looking for prey. The middle path led back into the world where I belonged, though I wanted to take the other two.
Mm. Yeah, it's that marriage, knowing that's where we belong. And then I love that image of the hawk and the horse, that you were talking about, and the horse saying, like, there's a particular way to get there, and like it's not that easy. Like it's winding, and like you said, we got to go through the gully, the road's not very good. So it's just that constant marriage of those two parts. It's so beautiful. So Diana is asking, who are the poets you first and still admire, and who do you return to for inspiration?
Oh my goodness. So there, certainly the early poets who really influenced me were Rilke and Neruda and Whitman, and I think also if we then as I moved on, many of the Sufi poets, Rumi and Kabir and Ghalib, and a contemporary poet who I so admire and love is Naomi Shihab Nye. I just love her work. Galway Kinnell, Stanley Kunitz was just amazing to me, especially in the second half of his life. Early on, some of Yeats's work was very moving to me. So there's just, on and on and on. And I think that, and I encourage this for those of you who are with us, like when I first encountered Neruda, I was just, in awe, certainly couldn't write anything like he was writing, but I felt like I belonged to that tribe.
Mm.
I so felt. In fact, when my oldest friend had introduced me in my early 20s, he had brought a book he had borrowed from someone, a book of Neruda's, and showed it to me on a hill. I remember it, Albany University in the
Yeah.
fall, and I couldn't let it out of my hands.
Mm.
Like I literally said, like I'll buy this guy another copy, but I can't, I'm sorry, I can't let go of. And that book is here right behind me on that
Oh,
shelf.
I love
And
it.
I did buy him another copy because it introduced me to a part of my soul that I sensed but didn't yet know.
Mm.
And so what I needed to do, and what I encourage anyone, is poems and poets that speak to us. It's as if they're soul guides. So be in conversation. If a poem or a poet introduces you to, it's like if a poem of mine, we go on a walk, you and I, James, and it takes you to, or any of the poems I've shared today takes you to a perch, and I'm saying, okay, this is what I saw, what do you see now that you're here?
Mhm.
And write your own poem. Be in conversation with the poets that speak to you, and not just say, oh, well, they did that. I guess I can't go there. That's a very competitive Western way of looking at things. No, no, Kabir, all these people, they open up these very universal perches, and they're saying, come, what do you see now that you're here?
Mm.
How does it affect you? What is the song that plays when it moves through your heart?
Mm.
This is what it said when it moved through my heart.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Yeah, not engaging, and I like to call it the poison of comparison. When you think like,
Right.
oh, I want to write like that, or I should be writing like this person, I'll never do that. Well, of course you won't, because your job is only to write the poems or pieces that you can write. And I was lucky enough to work with Ted Kuzer, who I know you know, and
Mm.
in graduate school, and I wasted a lot of time trying to write like Ted Kuzer, trying to
Oh,
write a Ted
yeah.
Kuzer poem, because I loved how he brought the reader so deeply into a moment. I thought, like, well, I want to do that, but I can only do that in my way, and I can't do it in that.
Absolutely. And Ted Kuzer is an amazing poet, a wonderful
Mhm.
poet.
Yeah, yeah, he's wonderful. So Ramon asks, can you each share in turn a bit about how your writing practice unfolds for you on a given day and any challenges that you meet there?
Yeah, I think for me at this point in my life, um, it's about being present, holding nothing back, and having my heart be completely open, and then simply being in conversation with what is there. And being present enough to whatever is before me until it becomes my teacher. And so I have found that, oh, certainly I want things to be as clear as possible, but the closer I am to that open heartedness, the less I have to mess with the words. So now, if something seems cluttered or clunky or complicated, rather than spending time trying to quote revise it, I feel a commitment to a deeper form of revision, which means I wasn't close enough, I wasn't open enough, go back and look again. That's revision. Go back and open my heart, be present longer, and try again. So when I am, two other things, and then I'll pause and I'd love for you to speak to it as well, James, that um, when my discipline now is I want to enter time, not move through it. So when I am in that open-hearted conversation, mostly I'm in timeless time. That's when we go, oh my God, did 3 hours just go by? But then let's say at the end, because my wife Susan is a potter, and so she works during the day. She's in her studio now, and so we always meet around dinner time. So now if we get to 4 or 5 o'clock, and I go in my mind, oh, we're going to meet in 20 minutes. I wonder if I can finish this poem. Well, now the discipline is as soon as I do that turn, I've made a product out of it. I'm not in
Mm,
relationship anymore.
mm,
And so the discipline is when I can't stop doing that because I'm human, but when I recognize it, drop it and come back later or tomorrow.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I would say very similar process for me. I mean, I'm always learning and finding a new way in, but I don't believe in this sort of workshop model of, taking a poem and stripping it down and picking at words and, taking it apart and putting it back together again. I think there's so much that can happen when you just leave something be. So, I like to write really early in the morning, prose, poetry, whatever comes to me. I often like to start with some sort of reading that gets me going, something deeper, more spiritual. Mark Nepo, I'll just say, is a great choice for that. Rumi, other poet friends like Rosemary Tromer, Naomi Shihab Nye. Um, but something that kind of gets me into that soul space, and then just meeting what comes, like you were saying, Mark, being in conversation with it. And I think the sort of thing to embrace is to give yourself permission to be in conversation. It doesn't matter how many poems you've published or ever will publish, like you're allowed to be in conversation with other poets and with whatever flows through you. And that's the ultimate goal. And I really appreciate what you say about not turning it into a product, like I have to finish it by this time, or why is it not done yet? Things like that.
Yeah, John, two, two great moments in literary history is John Stuart Mill said that you never finish a poem, you surrender it.
Mm.
And and when Virgil, the Roman poet, was writing the Aeneid, which he was ordered to by Marcus Aurelius, and it took him 10 years, and Aurelius called him and said, "Are you done yet?" Virgil famously said, "I'd rather die than look at it one more time."
I'm sure we've all felt that when putting together a book or something like that. Yeah, that feels true. Um, yeah, so just one more little question and then we'll move out of the space. But I think someone is asking about this idea of how does one find one's voice? So, there's having a voice in the world and finding the voice of writing. And of course, it feels like the two are somehow connected. And do we have any words of wisdom for that?
Yeah, well, let me just speak to that from my own experience. I think that through the years, I think we find our voice. I have found my voice by being authentic. And then after a while, the ring of truth is familiar, and I know I'm home. And so, you know, the two things that help me find and return to my voice is that it is always about presence and not performance.
Mm.
And it is always about giving attention and not getting attention.
Yes. Gosh, I mean, I think that's the whole thing, right? And yeah, I really appreciate it's about presence, not performance, and giving, not getting attention. I think you kind of have to look deeper, like, what is that intention? And if the intention with expressing yourself is simply the expression itself, and releasing whatever is inside of you, that's going to be the truest, most authentic intention to follow. And I think for me, the same is true. It takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of, sharing of your work and reading other people's work. But now when something comes to me, it's like, ooh, this is like you say, Mark, it has the ring of truth. It sounds like, the me that's not quite me, but something that wants to pass through me. And I am contributing to that. And so I've learned to just really listen to that and obey the urge to explore it and know that I have permission to do that.
That's wonderful, wonderful. So I
Yeah.
encourage everyone, it is Gandhi wonderfully titled his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. That
Mm.
is such a wonderful model. And I think, let your work be your experiments with truth and authenticity. Let your terrain of work be the unfolding and evolution of your spirit in your body in time on earth. What greater calling could there be?
Well, you have given us so much to get us closer to that today. So thank you so much, Mark, for being here and sharing this conversation with me. I know my heart feels more open and fed by all that you've shared, and I am sure that it's true for everyone else too.
Oh, well,
So
thank you.
yeah, so thank you all again for being with us. Just a reminder that the title of Mark's book is The Half-Life of Angels, now available. We'll send a link to get that book. And I read from my book Bluebird for the most part. A couple of people were asking about that. And so thank you so much for sharing this sacred space with us today. And look forward to reading more of your work, Mark.
Oh, thank you, James. Look forward to more with you too. And all many blessings to everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.